Welcome to the Arab Gulf States Institute. We have a full house today, so I'm pleased we managed to get everybody out here on such a hot day in Washington. I'd like to welcome our great panel, starting with Nadim Shehadi, Suzanne DiMaggio, Jamal Khashoggi, and Mohammad Tabaar, as well as our own Hussein Ibish, our senior resident scholar. No doubt that the July 14th agreement is being hotly debated not only in this town, but certainly throughout the region, and I have a feeling it will be today as well. But I think what's undeniable is the fact that American leadership, American diplomacy really was showcased at its best as we went through the negotiating process. And we hope that we have averted a conflict in the region, a region that hardly needs another conflict at this time of great instability. So I want to, again, welcome all of you.
Thank you so much, Marcel. What we're going to do today is discuss this issue in a conversational manner. So rather than having fixed presentations, I'll be asking questions of our panelists, either collectively or individually, and we'll discuss among ourselves. That's why everybody has their own microphone, and if you could all please speak into the mic when you speak, that would be greatly appreciated. Then after about an hour or so, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. We have a roving wireless mic that will be available to you, so please, when the time comes, identify yourself and comment or brief comment or a question, but not a speech. So I'll begin by introducing our panelists and thanking them very much for coming, and thank you also for coming this afternoon. We'll begin to my immediate right. Suzanne DiMaggio is the Senior Fellow and Director of the Iran Initiative at New America, where she focuses on the organization's growing body of national security work throughout the Middle East and Asia, and new initiatives on regional and global governance. To my immediate left, Jamal Khashoggi is the Saudi columnist, author, and general manager of the upcoming Al Arab news channel. He previously served as media aide to Prince Turki Al Faisal when he was Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States. To my extreme right, not literally but not figuratively, is Nadim Shehadi, who is director of the Faris Center for Eastern Mediterranean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, and an associate fellow at Chatham House, and a member of St. Antony's College at the University of Oxford. And finally, on my extreme left, Mohammad Ayatollahi Tabaar is a fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy and an assistant professor at the Department of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. He's also an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute here in Washington. And if you want to know more about any of our panelists, you can certainly look them up online, including at our website, if you like. So what we're looking at today is obviously the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was agreed on July 14 by Iran and the P5+1. But we're going to look at it a little bit differently than the usual take, because we're going to focus on regional responses and particularly the implications of the agreement for Iranian-Arab relations, right? And try to identify what aspects of the agreement and its effect on the context in which it was agreed to and will be implemented will open potential for improved relations and heightened security and greater stability, and what aspects of that dynamic might tend to exacerbate problems, create greater tensions, and prove challenging for the implementation process. So I think we have a great panel to join us in looking at that today. And I think it's really important to note that the agreement between Iran and the P5+1 comes in the context of at least two factors that make this issue particularly relevant. One is growing concerns in the Gulf, some of the Gulf states, also in Israel, but especially among the Gulf states, about the American commitment to the region, about its commitment to the security of its traditional allies, in this case the Gulf states, and its commitment to guaranteeing the stability and security of the status quo in the Middle East. Real question marks about both this administration and its policies and the generalized trajectory of American foreign policy, which are, to the same question broken into two parts. But I think that's really important to underscore. And I'm not going to go into the details about how those doubts have emerged and been exacerbated and have not been assuaged over time. But I think it's important to note that as a stressor right away. The other is that the agreement comes in the context of a high point in regional confrontation, particularly between forces aligned with Iran on the one hand and forces that are somewhere or another in general allegiance or cooperative relationship with Saudi Arabia on the other. The most dramatic example of this is, of course, in Yemen. The Saudi-led intervention, which has gone through at least two phases and has just seemingly registered some of its first clear-cut, I think universally recognized successes, marks a new level of confrontation between forces that are representative of the Gulf states, in this case their militaries directly and their allies in Yemen, and forces aligned with Iran, the Houthis in particular, and some other groups in Yemen as well. So having noted all of that as the context and sort of also noting that the Supreme Leader of Iran gave a very bellicose speech the other day, and Secretary Kerry, in his interview with Nadia Bilbesi yesterday of Al Arabiya television that you can see online and read the transcript, had a negative reaction to that bellicose speech. The question I'd like to lead off the panel, to what extent, and this is the biggest big picture question, but why not get right into it? To what extent can the context of this agreement yield an improved relationship? Is that quixotic, or are there grounds, and if so, what do you think they are, for moving to a more stable, peaceful relationship? And just like your very most general take on this question, and then we can get into specifics as we go on. But whichever you would like to, why don't we begin with Suzanne DiMaggio and then go around the table and see sort of the general reaction to this fundamental question.
Thanks so much, Hussein, and thank you and your colleagues here at the Arab Gulf States Institute for organizing this panel today. Couldn't be more timely. Getting to the heart of your question, I guess the big question on everyone's mind is, does this deal result in an unleashed Iran or a more pragmatic, moderate Iran? And I think that's too black and white a question. I think it's going to probably be a little bit of both. But let's be clear up front. What this deal does do is, at least for 10 to 15 years, it assures us that Iran will not obtain a nuclear weapon. And I think that in and of itself is a major diplomatic breakthrough. The other thing to remember is that this is a deal that goes beyond the United States. It also includes 5 other countries, including our very closest allies. So it's interesting to me, I live in New York, but coming here to Washington and the pushback against the session in the United Nations yesterday to approve that resolution against bringing it to the UN first was very interesting to me. I think maybe as a New Yorker I can say Washington is not the center of the world, because we all know New York is, but I guess this actually proves it. But getting to the question, I think what we're going to see now is a very tough period following this deal, not only between the United States and Iran. There's a lot of adjusting to do, but of course the focus of this panel with the region. there's a whole lot of numbers being floated out and how much Iran will gain, what the windfall will be. I think there's been an overestimation of what those unrestricted funds will give Iran, but that's besides the point. I do think that what we can expect is that now President Rouhani and his colleagues have a victory. And keep in mind that President Rouhani was elected with the mandate to get the sanctions removed, to improve the economy, and to increase interaction with the world, to reintegrate Iran back into the world. So in terms of popular support, this is a big boost for him. So it does follow with two very important elections coming up in Iran in the coming year, that this will help the moderates. So on the one hand, we will see, I think, a more pragmatic Iran. And if you look at the statements coming out of Tehran, whether it's Ali Larijani yesterday or Rouhani after the deal was made, and Zarif's FT op-ed and YouTube video, and even the leader, they're consistent in saying that if this deal is successfully concluded, we could expect Iran seeking a more cooperative relationships, especially in the region. Larijani made the point, he's the Speaker of the Parliament. He emphasized the point, especially cooperation with other Islamic countries in the region. So they're all speaking from the same script, and even the leader, who always hedges, and getting to your point, Hussein, of his comment yesterday, he always puts himself in a position where if things falter, he can say, I told you so. But even he said that with a successful deal, Iran would be able and willing to talk about other issues in the region. So my point of view is let's test this. Just as we tested the Iranian seriousness on negotiating their nuclear program. Maybe we could talk about the details later, but in my opinion, I think Iran conceded quite a lot in those negotiations. Maybe I have the minority view on the panel on that, but we'll see. But I think we also have to keep in mind that this deal was a non-proliferation agreement. It was focused on placing restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. It was focused on putting in place the most intrusive, extensive inspection regime the world has ever seen. So this was not a let's transform Iran agreement. So we need to keep that in mind. So in terms of the objective, I think we can check the box. But we must be clear that we should not expect Iran to suddenly abandon the groups that they've been supporting in the region. We should not expect Iran to suddenly become a model citizen of the international community. But my last point I would make is we now have an opportunity to test Iran's seriousness. Javad Zarif's 4-point plan on Syria. Let's see. If Iran has a seat at the negotiating table, let them show their hands. So I think we're entering a murky period, Hussein, and one where we need, for the U.S. part, needs to continue this approach of principled diplomacy.
Jamal, what do you think the prospects of this deal having a positive impact on regional relations are? Any chance at all?
No.
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 Okay.
I don't think it will.
Right, everybody.
And I'm not the only person who thinks that way. Our former ambassador to Washington, Prince Bandar, also suggested that. This deal will break out into small wars into our region. Because, as Susan put it very well, it is a non-proliferation deal. It's not let's change Iran deal. The Iranians have showed no commitment to change their behavior in the region. I will list 3 regional problems, and you will see the Iranian misbehavior there. Lebanon is without a president for the last 3-4 years. Iran is to be blamed there. civil war in Syria is continuing. Iran to be blamed there. The Houthi are refusing every possible meaningful, peaceful proposals proposed to them, not even by Saudi Arabia, by the Omanis and the Americans, and Iran is to be blamed there. So we should not anticipate a breakthrough of peace in the region, but rather more regional conflicts. Saudi Arabia is committed to that. It had announced that publicly. Our foreign minister made that very clear that we're going to continue to confront Iranian disturbances, or shaghab. And I think you should use another stronger term, because what the Iranians are doing is not disturbances. They are violating international laws in the region. So what I would predict, there will be more conflict in the regions before of the deal, unless someone take this matter seriously and have some international summit to deal with Middle East problems, like another Yalta, or because there is a need for that. There is, if we had a map here, we all can imagine the difficulties the Middle East is going through, from Libya to Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. It's a war zone, and it requires a serious intervention by the world. Saudi Arabia is taking a lead there, a responsibility, but to leave Saudi Arabia alone at it, it will eventually end up in a major conflict with Iran. So we better have also the world on the side of Saudi Arabia and Iran and Turkey in some kind of a summit to resolve those matters once and for all.
Mohammad, what's your point of view, and what's the perspective in Iran on this?
I think the most dangerous misunderstanding here is this assumption that Iran has been the winner in this whole thing, or at least Iranians feel they have been the winner. When you look at the debate inside Iran, it's completely the opposite. The Iranian conservatives are as worried about this deal and the post-deal environment as much as the Arab countries are. And they see this deal as a first step for a possible confrontation with Iran and even regime change in Iran. So they are worried about this.
An American, an international confrontation?
Yes, exactly. That the US would use this deal to come up with a number of excuses to put pressure on Iran, or would use this deal to intentionally empower certain elements in Iran and do regime change within the country. So explosion or implosion. So they have this sincere belief and concern. So they're not too excited about this deal. And this is a very, very dangerous misunderstanding that we see outside of Iran, that people think that they think they have won. They fooled the US, as we were talking earlier today. This is not the perception. And they are expecting a major confrontation in the region. And the problem is...
So it's more than just fearing it, they're expecting it.
I think the border, yes. When you see with all the trips to the region and promises of giving more weapons and containing Iran and everything, so they fear that. They worry about it, that this could come, this could happen. And I think unless, as you suggested, this deal is, and you as well, Suzanne, that this deal is accompanied by a number of unilateral negotiations, it could potentially inject more uncertainty and insecurity to the region. So and this could be very problematic.
Is that maybe a surprising kind of it's a moment of or a point of convergence here between an Iranian perspective and a Saudi perspective, that that the real need for diplomatic intervention to protect their interests?
I think on the part of the more pragmatic factions in Iran, yes, they do view that, and they are interested, and they think the Saudis are not interested at all. And the Iranian conservatives say that even if we try, the Saudis are not going to do it. So why should we bother? That's why you see this difference inside Iran between the conservatives and the pragmatists. The way their rhetoric towards the Saudis. One is very, very aggressive. The other one is is more reconciling. But the overall belief is that the Saudis are not as interested as Iran is.
Okay. Nadim, what
You
about...
want us to argue now?
You can if you like. I'd like to hear from Nadim about what he thinks and perhaps perspectives around the region. You know. And can you, yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hussein, and thank you for
Can you
inviting
speak
me.
into the
And thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm delighted to see so many friends in Washington. Well, I think that Mohammed's emphasis on the narrative is very important, and on the assumptions also. And I think if I were to say just one sentence in an elevator about this whole affair, and there's very little that hasn't been said, it is that there is a very deep crisis of confidence, and that this crisis of confidence is between this administration in the United States and its allies. So that's, I think, the main issue on the table, that the allies of the administration in the Gulf, in the Middle East, have lost confidence in its ability to protect them, especially from a danger that they perceive to be very real, which is Iranian intervention in the region. When you hear things like, we can't intervene in Syria because we'd be shooting at Iranians, and you cannot shoot and talk with Iran at the same time. But Iran seems to think that it can shoot and talk at the same time, because what is happening in the region is nothing less. It's not small skirmishes. It's a regional war waged by an establishment called the IRGC, which in a way occupies Iran too. So when you're dealing with, I've been talking to Iranians, but different Iranians, I suppose, and they are worried that this will strengthen the IRGC in Iran itself. And when I see the radicals in Iran expressing concern and ratcheting up the danger, I think the way it is interpreted in the region is that this is their normal behavior. Their narrative is to say that there is a danger, and that keeps them in control. And if the danger decreases, then they will lose control. So they will always talk about the danger. And the more they talk about the danger, the more they have control. And you're talking about an establishment in Iran that is not an elected establishment. And this is an establishment that whatever is elected in Iran is only elected by its approval in a sense. So that's I think is the main problem. So if I were to say to look forward from here and say what's the solution, and the solution is to have a vision of how we would like the future of the region to be. I'm sure everybody would like it to be without ISIS in the region. There is a consensus on that. But the corollary to this is that if you want a region without ISIS, you have to have it without IRGC as well. Because ISIS and the IRGC are the type of enemies that reinforce each other. You know, it's like, say, Bibi Netanyahu and Hamas. They draw strength by their very conflict, and they, in a devious way, depend on each other's success to succeed themselves. So if you use the IRGC like the US is doing now, indirectly, or the impression in Iraq to fight ISIS, then you are pouring oil over fire, and you are helping both ISIS and the IRGC strengthen. So if our vision is a region where Iran prevails, the real Iran that we know, the Iran, our Iranian friends, our Iranian, rather than an establishment which controls Iran, and where the regimes that prevail are stronger against ISIS, because I don't think we'll get rid of ISIS tomorrow. But we have to strengthen our friends in the region. Then we have to act in in that direction.
It's a quick question. I mean, isn't asking for an Iran without the IGRC at the center of its foreign policy asking for regime change?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we are asking.
So maybe the fears Mohammad cited are not completely
Yeah, I mean,
fanciful.
there are taboo words. You said it, I didn't. You know,
I
we
did.
have
I did say it.
But
Oopsie
we are.
daisy.
I mean, in a way, we are asking for regime change in Syria too, and we are asking for a better Iraq. We're asking for regime change in ISIS. You know, there's no
in Raqqa for sure, yes.
Removal.
Yeah.
in regime it's total removal, and you see, just as there are enemies that reinforce each other, there are enemies also that in a way it's a zero-sum game. So between ISIS and Saudi Arabia or the Gulf or King Abdullah of Jordan, it's a total zero-sum game. They could lose really badly. It's not they have nothing to gain from the conflict, and so the internal conflict within what you call the Sunni world and the Shia world is far more serious than the conflict between them.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Marja'iyya in Najaf is already feeling the danger of IRGC presence and IRGC control in Iraq.
Jamal, you had a reaction to the concept, several of the ideas that were thrown out by Mohammad. So why don't we hear some of your responses to that, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about the IGRC and its role after that.
But it does make very much sense for Saudi Arabia and Iran to start dialoguing and resolving their differences. But of course, that requires change from both countries. I can argue that we are right. Our position, for example, we are standing with the right course of history in Syria. Syria has to have a regime change. The Iranians refuse that. We need Hezbollah in Lebanon to be a political party that qualify or with the Lebanese constitution and with the Taif agreement. And again, Iran and Hezbollah refuse that. We are pushing for reconciliation in Yemen. Yes, we are having a war against the Houthi because we see them as a perpetrator of a coup, and we don't want them to be controlling Yemen, but in the same time, Saudi Arabia never suggested the elimination of the Houthi political future. So I would argue that Saudi Arabia is standing in the right course of history, while the Iranians want the opposite. The Iranians want peace with Saudi Arabia. They want us to leave Bashar rule Syria, leave Hezbollah intact in Lebanon, let the Houthi control Yemen, and let's have peace together and go and let's gather strength to fight ISIS. This Iranian deal doesn't go with us. Yes, we have we see ISIS as an enemy, but we also see Bashar and the Houthi and Hezbollah and sectarian conflicts in Iraq as part of the reasons for the emerging of ISIS. So the gap is big and huge, and it requires a build of a confidence. Okay, who is the newcomer in the regional issue? It is President Obama. It is the deal. It is so the Americans have to help there, or to include those regional issues which the president still refused to include them in the Vienna Agreement. But in order for this agreement to bring peace, not to succeed, the agreement could succeed as a non-proliferation agreement, but it might not succeed in bringing peace. In order to bring peace, he should include those regional matters and concerns of Iran and Saudi Arabia on some international negotiations.
Mohammad, the question is, how would that sort of overture be received in Iran, do you think? I mean, is there any basis for that sort of attitude providing grounds for a dialogue?
Former President Rafsanjani of Iran a year ago said he regretted how the relationship between the two countries declined under Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And he said Iran and Saudi Arabia together could solve all the problems in the entire Muslim world. So there is this deep interest on the part of one part of the establishment in Iran, one political faction in Iran, led by President Rouhani right now. Yes, they're not the most powerful, but they are part of the polity. And in the WikiLeaks documents that recently came out, we saw that the Saudis were helping, for example, were providing scholarship to the son of Iran's former vice president under Rafsanjani, Ayatollah Mohammad. So the Saudis know these people, know these elements, and they're in touch with them. It's not that they don't appreciate that. It's not that they see Iran as one IRGC. No, it's not the case. They know that. They have worked with these people before. Under both former President Rafsanjani and former President Khatami, the security arrangements between the two countries improved. They signed several agreements. So there's no question about it. There is an interest, and the Saudis do know about it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, yes, Iran has been assertive in Syria. There is no question about it. But I don't know if Saudi Arabia is the Norway of the Middle East either. Who's bombing Yemen right now? So the Saudis are involved in these things. Where does the money come from? The money that goes to Syria to back the Salafis. So they are part of the problem. There's no question. Iran is part of the problem. So are the Saudis. So that's the other thing.
Suzanne, oh sorry.
Yeah, one final issue is the IRGC.
Yeah.
You know what? The IRGC as interested in failure of this deal as the Saudis are. And I can assure you. The head of the IRGC, Mohammad Ali Jafari, yesterday denounced one section of the Security Council resolution that was passed yesterday, and in this section put an end to Iran's ballistic missile tests. So, and they said that they're not going to abide by that. So,
Suzanne, the question then is, what steps could regional powers, including Gulf states and their Western allies and others, take to strengthen the hand of those in Iran who might be receptive?
Well, I agree with Mohammad's assessment. I think it's very clear that the Iranians, since President Rouhani has come to power, have been making great outreach to the Saudis. If you look at President Rouhani's first foreign policy speech when he came into office, it focused on Saudi Arabia. Certainly, the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, has been looking and trying to have some high-level meetings with the Saudi counterpart for quite some time now. He did travel to Saudi Arabia to attend King Abdullah's funeral, but that wasn't a substantive encounter, and he did have a meeting with his counterpart at UNGA last year in New York. So I'd like to concentrate a little bit on maybe what the U.S. can and should do in this context. And I think this is an area where the U.S. could encourage our friends in Saudi Arabia to respond to the Iranian overtures. It's clear that the widening sectarian divide, whether you see it as sectarian or geopolitical or geostrategic, is only going to be bridged through dialogue. So that's first and foremost. And I would say other friends in the region should be encouraging the Saudis to respond positively to the Iranian overtures. And as Mohammed rightly pointed out, there is a precedent for constructive dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Secondly, I think, you know, this deal, and it's come out in the panel so far, the region is not worried whether or not this nuclear deal, whether Iran will abide by it. I think they're more worried what happens if Iran does abide by it. And that's a big question. And today we see Ash Carter, Secretary of Defense, is in Israel. I call it the reassurance tour. And I think then he's going to Saudi Arabia. So we should expect the U.S., the Obama administration, to be doing a lot of this going forward, providing reassurance, whether it's reiterating what was accomplished at the U.S. GCC summit and beyond. That's going to require a major diplomatic energy and capital on the part of the U.S. government to reassure friends in the region. I'd like to take up Jamal's suggestion of the convening of an international summit to discuss all these issues. I think that might be helpful down the road, probably not now. Instead,
It could cause harm now?
I
or-
think it probably could
Okay.
cause harm.
All right.
Instead, let me be very frank. What I would like to see is the U.S. and Iran take up some direct discussions on all the issues that have been brought up out to the fore right now in a very quiet, low-key way. I'll avoid using the word secret, but maybe bordering a bit on secret. And let's be frank, the United States and Iran have been discussing ISIS on the side. The venue of the P5+1 talks made that possible. They're on record, both governments, of discussing ISIS since June 2014. So we have been having ongoing discussions with Iran now on ISIS for well over a year. That certainly should be continued. And more recently, both governments have acknowledged that they have been talking about Yemen. So these discussions are underway. I think they should be, brought up into focus. But at the same time, knowing the sensitivities of this, it would have to be done quietly. And then finally, let me just say, I think the U.S. has to really focus on trying to bring about a new modus vivendi in the region, where both brings balance, particularly amongst Saudi Arabia and Iran, following up on my previous point, getting to a place where key powers in the region can agree to disagree, live and let live, however you want to call it. I think this is a great diplomatic challenge for the United States to help bring that about.
Jamal, I'd like to get your reaction to many of those comments, but I mean, specifically, the one thing that Mohammad and Suzanne seem to agree on, which is the notion that Iran has been reaching out to Saudi Arabia in a kind of sustained and systematic way. I mean, do you see it that way? And what's your reaction to some of the other things you've heard?
As I put it before, Iran wants to say salam and we are Muslim and let's have unity, and in the same time, continue on bombing the Syrians. Those things do not work together. But I want to comment on Susan's reluctance to go for the idea of some major international event to bring the regional Middle Eastern issue on the table. The Middle East events do not wait till the Congress approve of the Iranians deal. Things are happening today. We had a deadlock in Yemen, and many people, many among you here, start to have doubts about Saudi Arabia's ability to come out of the war in Yemen. No, we had a breakout. Last week, the city of Aden was totally liberated. Now, Saudi-backed forces of Yemenis are moving up north toward Lahj, toward Al-Anad. Things are working well for us. That is not because the Iranians helped us or reconciled with the Houthi, it is because of our resilience, the Saudi resilience to continue with the campaign. So we are taking matters into our hands. Same thing in Syria. We are not going to, the Syrians are not going to wait another 60 days. Maybe tomorrow or a week later, a week after, we're going to all wake up in the morning to Syrian rebels marching into Damascus. And that will lead the international various bodies to run and call for a meeting, and maybe the Turks will intervene in northern Syria. It could happen. Regional events in the Middle East are very quick and very rapid. So I would disagree with Susan that there is a need for a quick or for a prompt, not intervention, but America needs to show interest today to the matters in the Middle East, because they are not waiting. And the decision makers of those matters are not in Riyadh or in Tehran. They are a Syrian rebel leader sitting underneath an olive tree in Idlib. He is the one who is going to decide whether we're going to march into Latakia or not. They are the decision makers, and those guys do not check with Riyadh or Tehran or Washington. So events in the Middle East are happening as we speak right now. Thank you.
Nadim, in addition to other thoughts, I'd like you to consider the question of whether, because we've talked a lot about, and you raised specifically the issue of ISIS, and we've heard a lot about the potential for US-Iran cooperation on ISIS, including from Suzanne. Is there any prospect for the mutual threat from ISIS being the basis for more cooperation between Iran and Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, but others as well? And anything else you'd like to react to?
Yes. Well, yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, my reaction to Suzanne's proposal of secret negotiations between the U.S. and the Iranians, quiet. I think there's nothing that would alarm U.S. Allies in the region more than that. I mean, that's basically, they already assume they're happening, and they already assume there is a collusion between the IRGC. I repeat, it's not Iran, yeah, and the U.S. in fighting ISIS. And this is the biggest danger to Jordanians and to Saudis. If the king of Jordan is fighting ISIS, and ISIS gains its legitimacy by claiming that it is fighting the Iranian presence, and the king of Jordan is seen as fighting ISIS in collusion with Iran, he could lose his throne. I mean, Jordanians would disagree on this, but I think that the fight between Jordan, say, and ISIS is a total zero-sum game. The tribes are the same. Well, I won't elaborate on whether ISIS will look better to people in Jordan than the current position, but the same applies to Saudi Arabia. So it is a very dangerous game for both, and the U.S. Being allied to, in any way, to Iran or to IRGC, or even coordinating with the IRGC in Iraq, is a huge danger to the U.S.'s allies in that. So one has to really emphasize this point, that if you want to defeat ISIS, you have to also look for, if you want a region free of ISIS, you have to look at the region free of the IRGC. I think we should go back to the 80s. We are suffering now the consequence of the Iran-Iraq war. ISIS is the legacy of Saddam Hussein that has survived him. It's a monster that Saddam Hussein has created, which has survived him. And the IRGC is a legacy of the Iran-Iraq war. It was a horrible war. It was probably the worst that happened in the region. Everything else sort of, in a way, results from that. And it's time to fix it. And I salute, in a way, the optimism of Jamal, because he is, my impression coming from the region last week is that people have given up, and they're saying, well, we only have 17 months left of Obama, so when he leaves, maybe things will get better. So, but I don't agree on this. I think this administration should fix it. I think that they have the potential to fix it. There's an urgency, and
what would the first step look like? If there really is something the administration could do, what would it look like at first? I mean, anything.
Well, I mean, there was a report published a couple of days ago by American Progress, which in a way recommends that the U.S. should now look at the problems of the region that and specifically the problems that Iran is causing in the region now that this deal is behind us. And I think that the U.S. should do exactly that. The U.S. should look at Iraq as a problem which has been created largely by Iran. And it should also, I think, review the experience of the U.S. intervention in Iraq. I think the received wisdom from the intervention in Iraq looms very high in all the decision-making, all the perceptions, and some of those are very questionable because I don't think Iraq was better off with Saddam Hussein. There's no question about that.
It was not better off under Saddam than it is now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the history of Iraq between say 1980 and 2003, and American policy there was, it is far worse than the invasion. I mean, the sanctions, looking the other way when Saddam was massacring his own people, supporting the Iran-Iraq war, oil for food, which strengthened Saddam.
Well, but I mean, what do you conclude from that? To say that the 80s and 90s and 90s were worse in Iraq than they are now? What do you take away from it? What's the implication of that?
Well,
I mean, I understand the point, but
yeah. Well, I think that if we have a conversation about the Iraq invasion and the American role in the Iraq invasion, and in a way question the received wisdom from that, which drives a lot of American policy and perception.
I understand.
We are certain to make progress, let's say, because the perception is so bad.
I understand.
Yeah.
They they only go up.
Yeah, it
Suzanne?
can only go.
Just a quick intervention on that. I would love to come back for a panel to assess the pros and cons of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. But I think it's the situation now is so urgent, we need to look forward.
Yeah.
What are the practical solutions? And what I'm advocating is, right now, let's just call it for what it is. The United States and Iranian militaries of both of our countries are now operating in the same theater, fighting a common enemy. And for us not to be talking to Iran would be the height of irresponsibility. It's not collusion. It's, a very potent enemy. And yes, the response should be regional, but we're not seeing others step up. So I think the United States has no choice for both practical reasons, but also, thinking about how to deal with this in a sustained way than to talk to Iran about it.
One of the subjects would have to be the future of the Syrian regime. I mean, so that. But which brings me, Mohammad, to the question of, because we keep, Nadim keeps bringing up the role of the IGRC, which is to say, Iran's foreign policy over the past, decade and a half, or the past decade, which is perceived by many of its neighbors as aggressively hegemonic, if not almost kind of neo-imperial or something, at least in its ambitions. So is there any basis at all for looking forward to a kind of, if you want to say, post-IGRC-driven or let's say a kinder, gentler Iranian approach to the region, which, listening to Jamal, is absolutely required for any progress with its neighbors. I think I'm not wrong in suggesting that's the basis of everything you've said. So, is there any reasonable prospect of that at all?
Iran is a natural power in the region because of its size, because of its population, because of its history, because of everything.
Yeah.
The problem is some countries in the region would like to see Iran as artificially boxed in and weakened. And this has happened for a long time, but it may not be able to, it may not sustain. That's their fear, that Iran could come out of the box. Going back to the role of the IRGC, yes, the IRGC is very powerful, but the IRGC is often more powerful when there is more external pressure. Back in 2001, after the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, Iran and the U.S. were negotiating in Afghanistan to bring down the Taliban and bring Hamid Karzai to power. It was after that, and the whole Axis of Evil speech, that the balance of power inside Iran shifted, and the IRGC gained more
So the
upper hand.
present ruling
Khatami.
faction? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And when it came to Iraq, the IRGC had a much bigger role. So more external pressure will automatically translate into more power.
Does that
IRGC.
apply to every kind of external pressure? I mean, are they winners in no matter what kind of external pressure, or is it?
So look
is
at-
there any way of calibrating it intelligently?
The IRGC is very much part of this government, part of the state, part of the regime. And we should be careful not to look at it as one monolith. There are different factions and groups within the IRGC too. Yes, the top commanders are appointed by the Supreme Leader and very much loyal to him. But when you look at the body of the Revolutionary Guards, there are a lot of reports that suggest that the rank and files, they vote very much like the rest of the society. For example, 97, apparently 70% voted, again, there are reports on that, voted for President Khatami and same thing later. So we should be careful not to look at the IRGC as like one entity, as a monolith. It is not. It is not.
So how would you strengthen a more responsible wing of the IGRC? That's sort of what Suzanne's practical questions get to.
I think more engagement with Iran could lead to, as Suzanne mentioned, empowering more pragmatists, even more pragmatist elements within the Revolutionary Guard.
Is that good, Jamal? Is that good enough a goal for Saudi foreign policy? Would it be engaging to Saudi decision makers or other Gulf decision makers? Say to them, look, if we engage with Iran in this way and that way, then we'll strengthen more moderate factions within the IGRC and within the current ruling faction, and therefore that's what we should do. Or is that just not good enough?
No, it's not. It's not even possible. Rafsanjani, who was a friend of Saudi
don't
Arabia.
agree with Mohammad.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It could help, but let's take Rafsanjani as an example. Rafsanjani is the closest Iranian to Saudi Arabia. He had a very warm relationship with the late King Abdullah. And but when Saudi Arabia started Yemen operation, he come out very mean, very angry at Saudi Arabia. He made very harsh statement against Saudi Arabia, slanderous somehow. There are the Iranians want the good Saudi Arabia is the Saudi Arabia that accept Iran and Iran hegemony in the region, and that Saudi Arabia is not there. It will not accept it, and Saudi Arabia totally accept Iran as a regional power, the same way we accepted Turkey. Turkey is a regional power whom we have a very good relationship with. We respect their positive impact in the region, but there is no Turkish revolutionary guards in Yemen or in Syria or in Libya. There are Turkish businesses in Libya or interest in Abu Dhabi, but not revolutionary guards. So there's a difference between Iran regional power and accepting it as a regional power and intervention. it is all about interventions.
Okay, so if we could then shift the discussion a little bit and say, all right, well, so maybe certain kinds of engagement, maybe you just can't be convinced that there are moderate factions within the IGRC, but there are surely moderate factions in Iran, moderate forces in Iran. So if we could, sort of spell out a system of engagement, a series of steps that would lead to strengthening the hand of those forces, either within the ruling faction or perhaps on the outside of it, but still within the system. I mean, is that something that Saudi Arabia and its allies are interested in?
I would agree with this analogy, but maybe, I don't know if President Obama used that line, but the Trojan horses, that the more we engage with the Iranians, the more possibility that they will change in the long term. It is true. If this deal goes through and the Iranians begin to open up and more sanctions are lifted to the Iranians, there will be a change. Iranians, they want good life. And they don't want to go to Syria as fighters. They would rather to go to Dubai or to Istanbul or come here as students or as tourists. In the long term, it could help change the Iranians' mindset. But as we speak today, we are being bombed by Iranians-made barrel bombs. The Iranians are manufacturing. And
When you say we, you mean in Syria, Arabs in Syria?
yes,
yeah?
Arabs in Syria. And that's by the hand of the Iranians. Iranians are supporting the Houthi in Yemen and risking our security. It is happening today. So yes, in the long term, it will work. It is good for the region to incorporate Iran and the Iranian public and to rise a middle class among the Iranians who will override the conservatives. But we don't have the time for that. We are more concerned with what is happening today. We
So
want
the
immediate
emphasis-
changes today.
The emphasis has to be then, if I'm following you, the emphasis has to be on confrontational policies rather than inducements to cooperate. I mean, I'm trying to find some space here.
It's not
In your analysis for
confrontation.
something
We
constructive.
are on the defensive.
Yeah.
We are not fighting in Iran. We are fighting Iran away from our region. Iran is in Yemen, which is our region. Syria is our region. It is not Iranian region. Lebanon is ours too. It is. You see, I know it. Iran should not be seen equal to Saudi Arabia in strategic interest in the Middle East. It is the Arab world versus Persia.
Where would its strategic interests be?
Our strategic interest in peace in Syria,
No, I mean Iran's strategic interests. If
In
it's
Iran.
not in Iran, but
in
not
Iran,
beyond.
but
Okay.
not beyond.
All right.
The most Saudi Arabia will accept and concede to are Iranian interests in the south of Iraq, where there is Shia majorities, and I think we have lost Iraq as a unified country, and the Iranians have won maybe permanently south of Iraq in their sides.
So Iran and southern Iraq.
Yes, Iran and southern Iraq. But other than that, Syria, Lebanon,
The
Yemen,
rest of the Arab world is off. the
that
table.
is Arabs
Okay.
and going to continue to be an Arab.
Suzanne,
Okay.
and then Nadim. Well,
I'd
if
like
and then Mohammad. So we'll just
democratic. It's
Okay.
only it's Arab and democratic.
Arab and democratic. Okay, we'll do Suzanne, Nadim, and then Mohammad.
Okay, I'd like to make a few suggestions. One, I do want to emphasize that this is a big moment for Iran. And Iran would do well for itself if it sent some very clear signals at this point. For example, releasing Americans that they're now holding. Jason Rezaian's trial is going on. It's very disturbing that it's happening in such a no transparency or anything. So Iran should release him immediately. Secondly, in the case of Lebanon, helping to facilitate the election of a president there, doing something to help move that process along would send a very clear signal that Iran's intentions, to use President Rouhani's words, for a more cooperation, more harmony in the region are for real. So I'd like to emphasize that. But Hussein, getting to your question of some specific ideas, the problem of the IRCG is real. There's no question about it. The idea of a post-IRCG Iran, is a interesting thought, but I don't know, for practical again, I stress practicality because that's just in my DNA. I don't know if we have the luxury of talking about that right now. What I would suggest, there are two areas where I think we should be engaging Iran diplomatically. And one is Syria, of course, bringing about a political settlement there. Now, of course, even Zarif says it quite bluntly in his public remarks that, this isn't his portfolio, right? We know whose portfolio it is. Mr. Soleimani's.
Mr. Soleimani.
IRCG.
Okay.
But if we thought about a diplomatic process, I don't know if we want to call it Geneva 3, given the lack of success of the previous ones, where Iran is now invited to that table. They're going to send Dr. Zarif, not Mr. Soleimani, to engage in those discussions. So that's one way, I think, to bring this more moderate part of Iran to the fore, and it's logical that's who would oversee that, is the foreign ministry. So that's what I would suggest, is let's try to, with Russia's help, get that discussion up. And again, as I said earlier, is, if Iran is serious, this is the time for them to show their cards. Can they play a constructive role in helping to bring about a political settlement in Iran that eventually sees the departure of Mr. Assad? Let's get that discussion started ASAP. Secondly, I know it's outside of the region, but I would say for Afghanistan is a perfect example where if the contact group that was formed after 9/11 could be reestablished in some way, Iran invited to participate in that. There's a fairly new unity government in Afghanistan, and it's in both the U.S. and Iranians' interests, and I would argue the broader region's interest, that unity government succeed. And they're faltering. There's a lot of concern about the stability of that new government. So that would be another area where start a regional dialogue where Iran is invited. And again, that would be Dr. Zarif or another, maybe his deputy for the region participating in that. But those are two practical ways, I think, regional dialogue with Iran could help bring about potentially some solutions to these issues, but also going to Mohammed's point of empowering more moderate voices in the Iranian system.
Okay, great. Nadim?
I think we're coming to the real issue, which is what is American policy in this, and what are the next steps there, and I would like to go slightly beyond state concerns. I mean, beyond the concerns of Saudi Arabia and individual states in the region. Let's go to perceptions on the ground, because we are at a time when it is important, and when there are major changes in the region, and where these changes may be at the very beginning of manifesting themselves. They could. We don't know where they're going. So perceptions on the ground are very, very important. And if you put yourself in the shoes of someone on the ground, first of all, if you could choose the shoes, you would want someone whose aspiration is to come to Harvard Law School, or even better, the Fletcher School, rather than someone who wants to go to Tehran and train with a militia to blow himself up somewhere. So that's the first. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the first person rather than the second, and we want that person to prevail over the other.
Yeah.
Now, if that person sees that the U.S. is nominally helping the rebels in Syria who are being bombed by Assad, but only helping them to fight ISIS, they put a condition that the U.S. that any U.S. arms should not be used to fight Assad. And if they see that the U.S. is collaborating with Soleimani according to Susan, in Iraq against ISIS, and basically people are joining ISIS because of what Soleimani is doing in the region, then the U.S. is the enemy for that person, and you will see more radicalism in the region. If we see if that person sees the U.S. as supporting Sisi in the region, rather than a democratic process, then the U.S. is the enemy. So I think U.S. concern should be in its policy towards the people of the region, rather than towards the states in the region.
What kind of incentive structure?
So coming from Lebanon, the last thing I want now is for Iran to help us elect a president. Iran has done enough damage in Lebanon, so we don't want Iran to be, and we should not ask Iran to play firefighter after it had been the arsonist.
Okay.
Because then we're encouraging it to create more fires, because then we will ask her more to, and then we should not fall into tricks like good cop, bad cop. Like, for example, if we want to talk to the US, we send a smiling, tweeting mullah rather than Qasem Soleimani to the table, and then we think that the IRGC doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And if one looks back at the tape, I'm sure I see nobody's pronounced the IRGC's sort of acronym correctly. It is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's not the IGR.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's not the ICRG.
We're using a euphemism. It's true.
No, so people in Washington are not really aware of its existence and the damage it's doing, because it's been ignored as a hindrance to the deal. The deal was the most important thing. We shouldn't support the rebels in Syria because it will affect the deal in Iran with Iran. So I think now that the deal is over, we should look back and look at the real problems in the region that Iran is causing, and reassure regain confidence.
Okay, Mohammad, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Okay, well then we're going to open it up to questions. So we'll begin with Judith.
I just want to make a few points, and I do have a question or two. But Nadim, we know about the IRGC here, and I think one point that you're missing is that the IRGC does come under the control of Khamenei, the supreme leader, and the government. So there may be a reason why they're not going to be the focus of all the attention. And I'm not even sure that Soleimani himself deserves all the credit for the cleverness and for deciding what to do. But he is the point is he's a smart military manager, if you will, whatever you want to call it. But my questions come more to something that Jamal said. Why does Saudi assume that it's got to be the major power? I think that there are questions, not very loud anymore, I know, but there's not consensus on that necessarily within the GCC on Saudi policy, and I think there's discomfort with some of the antagonism towards Iran, hoping for another kind of solution. But why does Saudi assume that it's the most important? Because you're sort of putting yourself up as the only power to confront, and it's your strategic interests versus Iran. I'm not quite sure that quite works out. And I just wondered, as part of that, why didn't, when we looked at the failure of the so-called GCC summit here, and the argument that the Saudis and others wanted to use, that we should not be supporting that deal, didn't you get a lesson from how the Israelis failed to pursue the same strategy?
Okay, so that's two questions. Yes. Would you learn from the Israelis, and why you? Collective you.
Right.
From the Israelis' failure.
Yeah.
No, Saudi Arabia doesn't want to be the regional power. It was a reluctant leader since the beginning of events, whether we choose the invasion of Iraq as the beginning of the fall of the Middle East, or the Arab Spring, it's been reluctant to take the lead. It was hoping for other countries, such as Egypt, to help and to be by its sides. But since it is the only country that is strong enough, capable, and willing to lead, it took initiative. And it took Saudi Arabia like 4 years to do that. It all started last March with King Salman and an Operation Yemen. Also, another reason when you have to accept that from us, this is our perspective, we the Saudis. We feel targeted. We feel the whole Iranians, whether you disagree or agree with me, but this is what we believe. We think that the whole Iranians' campaign and expansionism is directed toward us. We are the grand prize, we are the Mecca and Medina, and no Islamic empire ever existed and claim supremacy without Mecca and Medina. And we think the guys in Tehran, they have that mindset. They are still thinking like the Middle Age Muslim conquerors. They're still there. We know it is the 21st century, but that's what we feel coming from Tehran. So we feel targeted, so we had to lead.
What about learning from Israel's failures?
No, we are learning from Israeli successes. If the Israeli lobby very well, and we should lobby. I think why should we give?
Didn't really win on the.
I know,
okay.
But they are making it difficult, and they get something in return. Maybe the more we pressure here in Washington, we will get the administration to listen to our concerns.
Fair
But
enough.
if we give them like what we did, we made a mistake in Camp David when we give a blank check of approval to the agreement. If we today make a list of what the Obama administration has delivered to us since Camp David, really not much. Not much. The administration position towards Syria is still the same. Mm-hmm. Yemen, okay, they did help in Yemen, but not strongly, not enough. They were let down in Yemen. So we should do some bargaining, just like what the Israelis do.
Okay, Nadim,
Just a very, very quick comment.
please.
You do want people like Jamal who are optimistic about lobbying in Washington to be stronger. You don't want them to be irrelevant in the region because people think that this is not going to lead anywhere. So the message is very important in that sense, because in the end you want people in the region to make the right choice at this very time.
Please.
Thank you. Stephen Reimer from the Middle East Institute. I just have a very quick comment to make about this Malta 2.0 idea that Jamal was bringing up. I agree with you, Suzanne. I feel that this would be a really fruitless venture. These conferences don't really work unless there's something called a herding stalemate, where every side of the group is stalemated, there's no progress, and everyone's hurting from it. And I think that's why we actually reached an Iranian
Do you
agreement.
think we're there or not?
I feel that we are not at a
We're
herding
not there,
stalemate,
okay.
and hence this conference would
Okay.
not really yield anything. It's
Do
everyone
you
thinks
think-
they're winning. Assad
Do you
thinks
think
they're
there's
winning.
a potential case to be made that we are?
No,
Okay.
no. I think Assad thinks he's winning. I think
Gotcha.
Sinai province thinks they're winning. I think
No.
Libya thinks they're winning.
No is a clear answer. That's
I
fine.
think there's no problem with that. My actual question, though, is more, is there any likelihood that Iranian economic integration in the region post-sanctions will sort of act as a deterrent for more of this quote-unquote bad behavior if we were to cite supporting the Houthis and Hezbollah as that kind of bad behavior?
Is that for anyone in
Anybody who's
particular?
willing to answer that. I feel that in this panel and in sort of discussions that have been happening around this topic recently, we're sort of obsessed with this hurt feelings thing that's happening very immediately. Oh, you're going to Iran, what about me? Why don't you
Yeah.
love me anymore kind of issue.
It's a good question. Thank you.
And just Mr. Shehadi's crisis of confidence. I'm wondering, are we
Right.
too caught up in that?
Okay. Let's do the economic part first. Were you, Suzanne?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take a crack at it. I'm sure Mohammad would have some good things to
hope
say
so.
too. On the commercial diplomacy front, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to have impact in Iran. One thing to keep in mind is it goes beyond the release of the restricted funds. So that's what the emphasis in the press has been. How is Iran going to spend that money? But if you listen to what Mr. Rouhani is saying, he's also emphasizing reforms. reforms of the economy that's in dire straits, partially because of the sanctions, partially because his predecessor mismanaged things so woefully, and to almost disastrous proportions. So when I think about reform of the banking system, other things within the economy to bring that, to revive it, the interactions with the world, it does seem to make sense that Iran's reintegration with the global economy and thereby the world would have a positive impact on empowering people who are more pragmatic, who are moderate. So I think it should be pursued. Now, keep in mind that, this deal that's being debated here in Washington,
Is there any danger that it might reinforce sort of existing behaviors? I mean, in other words, is there a danger that it might be perceived as, without any policy change, just being kind of a validation?
There's always that danger, but what's interesting to me, and we haven't talked about the Iranian people too much in this conversation, but they're a big factor here. And this deal is not happening in a vacuum. The dynamism of the Iranian society, I think someone on this panel, I can't remember who said, Iran isn't changing. Well, it is. It is a very dynamic society of 80 million people, a young society, highly educated, sophisticated society, high literacy rates, high education rates, and we know women are outdoing their male counterparts when it comes to higher education. So that gives, I think, us a little optimism. It should give us a little optimism about the future of Iran. If I was an Iranian decision maker sitting in Tehran, one of the things that would be consuming me right now is how to manage the expectations of the Iranian people after this deal. Because it's been sold to them as this is going to improve your bottom line. This is going to make your lives, the lives of your children and grandchildren better. That's a very potent message. It's also a very potent source of hope. And I think the pressure to deliver on that is great. And one quick point is, this is where I'm of two minds. When the sanctions are relieved and eased, U.S. sanctions are more or less going to be staying in place. European sanctions, there'll be widespread relief. But for the United States, more or less, U.S. businesses, individuals will be prevented from doing business in Iran, investing in Iran, unless, of course, it's the aviation industry or some food and medicine sectors. So on the one hand, I understand that plays well here in Congress. But on the other hand, I do feel that that's a missed opportunity for us. Bringing U.S. business, the U.S. business model, all that entails into Iran, I think would be a very positive step forward. So I really do, in some sense, regret it, but understand it.
Mohammad, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, very quickly, on the issue of economic reintegration, because of some major structural problems that Iran's economy is suffering from, that is not going to be easy. Massive corruption, mismanagement, and many, many other problems will not allow that to happen very soon. So that $100 or $150 billion of Iranian asset that is supposed to be released soon is already debated in Iran. The head of Iran's central bank announced that it's actually $28 billion. So some people say, what happened to the rest of it? So the money apparently is already gone before having arrived.
That's an old story.
And Iran's conservatives are saying, even Obama said it's $150 billion. Then what happened to the rest? So that's one issue. The other thing is Iran's energy sector badly needs foreign investment. According to some estimate, up to $500 billion. So
for rebuilding.
Oil wells are old, and many other problems because of the sanctions and other things.
So, I mean, potential grounds for regional trade, no?
Right. Yes, but as I said,
in particular.
But as I said, there is also this fear that this reintegration could be used to undermine undermine the regime in some ways. So the Revolutionary Guards is not very.
All right. Jamal?
Yes, in economic integration, we Arabs, Iranians, or Middle Easterns have learned how to separate between politics and economics, but some countries are better than others. Turkey and UAE will benefit the most out of the deal. And economically, and they will deal heavily with the Iranians. We, the Saudis, despite our differences, we still trade with the Iranians. Last Ramadan, there was an interesting controversy in Iran about Saudi cooking oil. And some mullah or Ayatollah called it a Wahhabi oil, and the Iranians objected to that. But it was a very popular cooking oil, which we export to the Iranians. So there is, we are good at that, separating economy from politics. I want to go back to Barbara and the issue of lobbying. There is still some sanctions against Iran. To use.
Barbara's next.
Okay. There is still some sanctions held against the Iranians, and I think the Saudis should continue in lobbying to maintain those sanctions which are related to Iran's supporting terrorism. And there's plenty of room for the Saudis to work in Washington, and again, we should not give a blank check of support to the deal.
All right. Barbara, over here.
First, thanks, Jamal, for confusing me with Judith Yaffe. I'm always honest. Honored to be confused with her. First, I take issue with the fact that the U.S. hasn't intervened more forcefully in Syria because it's afraid of killing Iranians. I think the U.S. hasn't intervened more forcefully in Syria because Syria is a mess and it's hard to know who to support. So the question is, given that Saudi Arabia is supporting a lot of these jihadi groups that are terrifying to us, and there are even reports that Al-Qaeda helped you retake Aden in Yemen, how do we deal with a situation where our nominal traditional ally sometimes seems more aligned with groups that are more of a threat to us than Iran is directly? And talk about what is the potential future for Syria? I mean, I think the Iranians would agree to get rid of Assad if they could see some sort of regime that could reestablish control over the country that would not be dominated by Sunni fundamentalists.
You do?
Thank you.
Okay. Good questions. Jamal.
No, the Al-Qaeda did not help the Saudis in retaking Aden, for sure. They are small, even in numbers, to do a job like that. But just like in Syria, yes, it is a mess there, and everybody is fighting everybody, and you could find somebody who is close to Al-Qaeda fighting along with pro-Saudi Arabian groups. It's a war zone. That is all. It is all happening. Iran did not start supporting Assad because of the arrival of Al-Qaeda. Iran was, from the day one, was supporting Assad even when the revolutionary was non-violent, even when the people were marching in the street with no single weapon in their hands. And Iran was supporting Assad continuously. And I'm sure they are happy with the rise of Al-Qaeda because it gives them the pretext of jihadists and diverting attention from democracy and the call of reform in Syria. We cannot choose who is against Assad in Syria. Yes, jihadists and Salafists are growing strong, and that is something we can continue in blaming each other for. The more we neglected Syria, the stronger those guys become. Now we cannot choose who's against Assad. We have two evil in Syria. One is Bashar al-Assad, the other evil is ISIS. So anyone between those two is good. And that should be the strategy, is to support anyone who is for a collective Syria, a power-sharing formula in Syria. Any fighter who agree with the power-sharing formula should be supported by Saudi Arabia, hopefully by America, in order to get rid of Bashar, whether he's a jihadist or a Salafist.
Okay. Before we go on in this room, I've got a couple of things from the overflow room, which we have here, because it's been so popular that it's filled up and overflowed, which is great. First is a comment, if you want to react to this, that's fine, is that ISIS is not, in all capitals, ISIS is not fighting Iran and not claiming to do so. I think that's a very interesting point. And if any of you want to react to that, that's fine. And then to Jamal, hasn't Saudi Arabia's track record been more destabilizing to the region than that of Iran? What exactly makes Saudi Arabia good, in quotes, and Iran, open quote, evil, close quote? Do you have any response to that?
Okay, just compare between us supporting a revolution and Iran supporting a dictator. That answered my question.
Okay.
And who backed the coup in
next-
Egypt?
Next, we had someone in the back, but we'll do the two gentlemen here, you first and then you.
Okay, my name is Yerevan Said. I'm with Rudao News Agency from Kurdistan.
Good.
My question is
Rudao, yeah?
Rudao.
You have Rudao.
Yes. My question is the basic premises of the U.S. policy towards Iraq has been towards the united Iraq has been to stop Iranian expansion towards the greater Arab world, but that has constantly proven to be wrong because we can see that Iran, has grown stronger and stronger. So, do you think if Iraq is divided, the Kurdish state to be established, it would serve as a buffer zone to stop Iranian expansionism towards Levant and other areas? Thank you.
And can you give the mic to the gentleman and let's see, sir.
Dave Ottaway, Woodrow Wilson Center.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of debate going on now in Washington about the impact of Iran getting back into the oil market.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be at least 1 million additional barrels in the next year.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you all think about whether this might encourage cooperation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that you've got to, that you might reach some deal on the price of oil. Or is it going to be an even more fierce competition?
Great question. Let's begin with that, and we'll come back to the question of the impact of the Kurds. So, is oil pricing and energy management, resource management, a potential source of cooperation, or simply a source of tension? That's a fantastic question.
Often, Saudi officials would reply by saying, "This is a pure economic issues, and we do not mix oil with politics." But of course, everybody disagree with that. I heard a rumor that when Prince Mohammad bin Salman went to Moscow, the Saudi proposed an oil cooperation. But because the Russians did not cooperate with us fully, the Saudi withdrew that offer. Same thing could apply with the Iranians. If not, I'm sure all of us gonna lose. And the price
Us being oil exporters in the region?
us being oil exporters.
Okay.
Oil price will continue sliding down and it will hurt us all. So in principle, yes, we should cooperate. But politics is there also. So the Iranians have to give something in order to cooperate. So there are incentives for Saudi-Iranians cooperation.
So it's possible.
It is possible. It is possible. But again, we are leading with people who are still living in this age of empire building.
Okay. Anybody think that it's either not possible or more possible than Jamal does? No. Okay. What about the impact of the of Kurdish independence potentially as a buffer zone specifically? You said potentially.
Look at the geography speaking. No, Turkey, Kurdistan cannot be a buffer zone. Kurdistan must have good relationship with Turkey, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, not necessarily, but Turkey and Iran are more important to it than Saudi Arabia. So I don't see much benefit from independent Kurdistan for our strategic confrontation with Iran.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment on the Kurdish factor on the panel? Okay. So we had then another question in the back here, the gentleman. Yes?
Abdullah Hindawi, George Mason University. I actually do have 2 points to say, but one of them is that I do not...
Can you speak more directly?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think that we can actually use this narratives as the Arabs versus Persians, because I don't think all Arabs share the same point of view of Saudi Arabia. I cannot put, for example, Mauritania and Saudi Arabia on the same thing. Egypt and Saudi Arabia, both of them as the closest together now, they are not sharing the same opinion either on Syria or Iran or whatever. So I cannot put both together and say that this is an Arab versus Saudi versus a Persian or Iranian issue. So let's put it as the Saudis' Iranian issue.
Okay.
Given this sense, do we think that that the deal as a deal of a non-proliferation deal is enough, or do we have to go past this thing to address the trust issues between both leaders? And this, I think, is the main issue, because it's not about the deal. It's not really about the content of the deal as much as it's about the reassurances.
The context.
That
yeah,
exactly
right.
itself. So do you think that if there are some mechanism to provide the reassurances for the Saudis and Iranians and even the Israelis in this sense, would this be good enough to boost the deal and make sure that we do not need another deal 3 years after from now or 4 years after from now to address the implications of this deal?
Okay, great question. Well, trust, confidence building. Mohammad?
I think the deal alone, as I said earlier, is actually not going to make the situation better. It can actually make the region more combustible because of this tremendous amount of uncertainty that could inject into the region. As I said, both Iranians, at least Iranian conservatives and other actors in the region, feel that because of this deal, they're going to lose and they're going to be undermined. You read the comments that come from the Iranian conservatives saying that through this deal, only 13% of the sanctions are going to be removed. Most of the sanctions will remain in place, and eventually there will be a confrontation in the region. The U.S. will try to contain Iran. So they have this.
How widely believed is that?
It doesn't have to be wide. To the extent that it is within the core of the conservative establishment, that is good enough.
Yes.
That could make a huge difference.
Okay.
And the thing is, with all the military spending and all the, as I said, visiting in the region, they feel more vindicated. One comment, if I can make.
Of course.
Everybody talks about the political and economic dimensions of this deal. I think there is one other subtle issue that is involved and is missing from the debate, and that is there was an article a couple of days ago that the deal shows that this is the death of anti-Americanism in Iran. And I think to some extent that is true. Iran is probably the least anti-American nation. Why it's the case, that's a different story.
In terms of public opinion.
Public opinion, yes.
Not government
yes,
policy.
yes,
Okay.
that's right, that's
All
right. And that's partly why we see these negotiations happen in the first place. It was not just the sanctions that everybody would like to talk about. It was also this public pressure that they wanted to open up to the world. And I think the Iranian government, the Iranian conservative establishment is very much expecting that this deal becomes an educational process for the population to show how the U.S. is not going to abide with the deal, how the U.S. is going to come up with a lot of excuses because of this vast gray area in terms of interpretation and implementation of the deal, to put more pressure on Iran, not to remove the sanctions, or even when they do, just to suspend these. And that could become an educational process for the population to see, to basically engineer the return of anti-Americanism. And if they can manage to do this, I can tell you this will be a lot more potent than having nuclear weapons. Bringing that anti-American sentiments that existed in Iran in the 70s and 80s will be a lot more powerful for them to do this. And this is what they're banking on.
Very interesting. Suzanne?
Talking about mistrust and this deal, I think it's important to say that this deal was not built on trust. I mean, when I read the document, it is clear that the onus is placed on Iran every step of the way to verify that it's complying with every detail of this deal. So the questioner's emphasis on trust and confidence building, I think, is the right one. I do think in the short term, and maybe even a little beyond, this deal will actually cause a rise in distrust and suspicion clearly in the region, because I think many people are looking at it as a zero-sum game, that this is because Iran has a win, and whether or not we want to call it a win, this automatically is Saudi Arabia's loss.
It's enough that it's perceived by those parties as an Iranian win. And
Yes.
it doesn't matter if Iran.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I think one of the things, getting back to my emphasis on what U.S. policy can be doing, is really trying to focus on some immediate things that can be done to help build some trust and build some confidence in the relationship. There's been some discussion on, for example, is now the time for the United States to open a interest section in Tehran that would help facilitate the issuance of visas of Iranians to travel. I think that would be a very positive step forward, whether or not it's feasible at this time, but I think it should be fully explored. So I think there are things within the U.S.-Iran bilateral relationship that can be done to build trust. I would say people-to-people exchanges. I think both the U.S. government and Iranian government should vocalize more support for such things. They might sound frivolous, the exchange of artists, scientists, sports, athletes, but I don't think they are frivolous. I think this is how you build relationships at the societal levels. And because of this hostility in our relationship for now 36 years, those ties have been badly broken, and we need to start rebuilding them.
Do you see any possibility of anything analogous between Iran and some of its other neighbors, the Arab states in particular? I mean, because we're focusing here on the Gulf region. So
Yeah, of course. I know less about that, but I would assume, all the music festivals in the region invite Iranian musicians to perform at that. Iran has an annual music festival at the Farj Music Festival. Invite more musicians from the region. I really think these sorts of exchanges can provide a foundation for building confidence at a societal level.
And trade too, presumably.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Especially with, if I may just say, especially with UAE and Oman. So if the sanctions are removed, the economic ties will be much stronger. So we should again, exactly. So we should be again very careful, as I think Barbara said, to see GCC as again one homogeneous entity. It is not.
Nadim.
Yeah. I mean, I'd prefer to have more questions because this has been replied. But if I want to say something very, very quick on the way the question was
Trust
framed.
in confidence, yeah.
I don't think we're talking about Persian versus Arab. I don't think we're talking about Shia versus Sunni. I think the main battle is internal on both sides, and the extremists on both sides win together in a sense. So that's the main point. And the perception is that the United States has done a deal with the extremists in Iran, strengthening them. And the region is worried that this will strengthen the extremists in our region as well, and that's the concern. So just in reply to the way the question was framed.
So if there's a zero sum, it's between virtuous and vicious circles, right? I mean,
if there's a zero sum, say in Iraq, it's between the IRGC control of the Hashid militias and the approach of someone like Ayatollah Sistani, who supports the state, and so that's the key issue in Iraq. So if the RGC controls Iraq, that's it. ISIS will be there forever and will gain forces. Yeah.
Okay, and Jamal.
Yes, my friend from George Mason did not like to see the situation as a confrontation between Arabs and Persians. Okay, it is milder than to see it as sectarians between Shia and Sunnis, because it is also there. Even President Obama began to see the situation as sectarians, and if you go back to his interview with Thomas Friedman, he referred in a number of times in that interview.
The one just now, or
the one? No, the one just now, about the sectarians' problems in the region. There are sectarians' problems in the region. It's a confrontation, no matter how do we describe it. To me, as a strong believer in Arab Spring, I would like to see my government believing and supporting people's choice And that's what we have in Syria and Yemen. People want democratic future, and alhamdulillah, we in Saudi Arabia finally began to believe in the Arab Spring, and we are supporting those agendas.
Okay, great. Karen Young,
Thank you.
my colleague here at the Institute.
Hi, I'm Karen Young here at the Arab Gulf States Institute. My question or comment was really more about differentiation of GCC states' foreign policies. We've really been Saudi-centric, I think, today. And one of the issues that I see is that almost everybody, except the Saudis and Bahrain, have a deal with Iran already, have an economic tie. I mean, Kuwait has a gas deal, Oman has a refinery deal, the UAE stands to have a gas deal and many, many trade opportunities. So everybody else has a bilateral tie, a way to engage. And so I wonder if you could maybe see this as sort of similar to the early 1970s, sort of the birth of the Gulf states, when there was a shift away from a British security tie and complex. This moment is, in my view, kind of the same way, in that I don't think that there's been a pivot away from the Gulf in the way that many people speak, but the ties to America are changing, and the opening with Iran kind of predicates that change. And everyone seems ready for it, except for Saudi Arabia. So I wonder if you could all maybe speak a little bit about differentiation of Gulf state foreign policies and who is more ready, or who maybe is changing at the fastest pace.
Great question. So differentiation within GCC, and is there an analogy with the early 70s, which that's really interesting. I'll throw that open to anyone who wants to address it.
I'll just briefly agree wholeheartedly with the premise of your question. I think we've seen virtually no attention or analysis given on what is going to be the benefit to GCC, economic benefit of this deal. And I think your question strikes at the heart of that. I mean, clearly UAE and Oman have traditionally been Iran's biggest trading partners. So will we now see an uptick in that relationship? I've watched this, I've seen some analysis that says UAE expects trade to go up by between 15 to 20%. I don't know if those figures are within the realm of reality, but it does seem likely. So I think when we talk about the Iran deal and the benefits it'll bring to Iran, I think having a conversation about the real economic benefits it brings to GCC states, other outside of the Saudi prism, it would be a very helpful way to think about how Iran could be encouraged to be what it stands to gain from being a very abiding by the deal and also expanding these ties.
Anybody else? Yes, please.
Okay, again, we should separate between economic relation with Iran and confrontation on hegemony of Iran. Those deals you refer to are barely economic, but you are right. There are a difference in the stand of GCC countries, and I can separate them into two, hardliners and softliner. The hardliners, of course, is Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Bahrain. Bahrain, it has its reasons because Bahrain, it is in the middle of a confrontation with the Iranians' hegemony. Qatar, I don't know, the Qataris have a broader vision about the future of the Middle East. The UAE, Oman, and Kuwait, they are less of a confrontation mood with Iran. We in Saudi Arabia, we are more of it because we are the center of the Arab Peninsula, and those Iranians' encroachment or advance, it is on our account. It is on our Syria and our Yemen. And I use this term often in my articles, Shamina wa Yemenina. And this is a saying by Prophet Muhammad. He said, Allahumma barik fi Shamina wa Yemenina. He was the leader of the Arab Peninsula at that time. So from his geopolitics at that time, he saw Sham, Syria, and the Levant as the Sham of the Arabian Peninsula and the Yemen of the south as the Yemen of Arabian Peninsula. So Saudi Arabia is going to maintain that position. in protecting its interest of the Arabian Peninsula in the north and the south. And the small Arab state, they also take Saudi Arabia for granted. They know Saudi Arabia will always be there. Even whatever relationship they advance with Iran, they know if there is a risk to them, the Saudis will come. So they will not risk their relationship with the Iranians. But the situation hasn't leveled to Saudi Arabia demanding you are either with me or against me. No, the other Gulf states, they can maintain a relationship with the Iranians, but in the same time, they are very much also supportive of the Saudi policies right now.
Anybody else have a comment on this? No. Okay, Joyce.
Yes, hi, Joyce Karam with Al Hayat newspaper. Good to see you here, Jamal, Mohammad, Nadim, Suzanne. My question to Jamal is on the new dynamic emerging between Saudi and the Muslim Brotherhood. You've written in length about this. If you can explain it a bit, is Iran driving this dynamic? And to my friend Mohammad, if you can speak, how does the Iranian public opinion view Iran's role in the region, in Syria, in Iraq, with Hezbollah?
Great question. Let's take the question from the gentleman.
My name is Matar Brahim Matar, former MP from Bahrain. My first question is for Jamal. You raised the issue about the role of Iran in Bahrain. Your channel had been expelled from Bahrain after an interview with a senior opposition member. So why you consider the issue is about Iran while it's clear that the conflict is with the opposition in Bahrain? The second question is for Suzanne. You were advising the administration to encourage the dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran. How feasible this advice is? Returning back, for example, for a senior former official in the administration, Nicholas Burns, he considered the relation with the GCC countries as the front buffer against Iran. So do you believe that U.S. still need a front buffer against Iran? If so, how can U.S. will encourage the dialogue with Iran?
Okay, let's take all of those in reverse order. Let's begin with that last question for you, Suzanne. What's the likelihood of the U.S. actually playing that role? And do they need a buffer?
Yeah, I want to emphasize I don't see the United States, I'm not advising the United States to go on television and start tweeting Iran and Saudi should come together. I'm saying in quiet dialogue, encouraging this to happen. And I do think your example of the U.S. perception as the GCC as a buffer against Iran was a different time. And we've seen a lot in the region happening since that time, to say the least, a lot of turmoil. At the same time, we've seen something achieved between the U.S. and Iran that I don't think anyone would have predicted even just a few years ago. So my only point is the U.S. now, I think, has an opportunity to build on the momentum that has come about because of this Iran deal. The fact now that U.S. and Iranian officials are now talking regularly, for us to see Americans and Iranians at the same table just not too long ago was taboo. Now it hardly causes a blip. This is an opening, and we should use it to advance our interests in every way, shape. We should prod, we should poke, we should do everything we can to advance U.S. interests in the region. And I would say finding a way for Iran and Saudis to come together and begin dialogue on addressing many of their profound differences would be a good place to put some of that diplomatic capital. Okay. I'm not pretending that this is going to be easy or that it would even happen, but I think now we have the opening, we should use it.
Great. We had two questions for Jamal, and so we'll do them both. One had to do with the opposition in Bahrain versus Iran as a factor in Bahrain. I think that's a very interesting question. And then we have another one, but go ahead first on Bahrain.
Okay, on Bahrain, I must separate my misfortunate in Bahrain from the politics of Bahrain. Despite what Al-Arab went through, and Al-Arab is continuing as a channel, we're going to just relocate somewhere else. But we all know that Bahrain is under a threat, and particularly by Iran. And very much Iran never hidden its wish to see Bahrain moving away from Saudi Arabia toward Iran, but we should always remember that the Bahrainis see the mainland. When they talk about the mainland, they see Saudi Arabia as the mainland, not Persia. And the causeway that link Bahrain, it linked Bahrain to Saudi Arabia, not to Iran.
That applies to most of the opposition, right?
I mean, and even the Shia opposition in Bahrain, they have more friends in Saudi Arabia than friends and family friends than family friends in Iran.
That is the gentleman's point, I think. Really. Okay.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think we have a moment of convergence there. So that's great.
But the more important question, the issue of the brotherhood in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that was the
yes. Saudi Arabia, it is not siding or shifting toward the brotherhood. It is just normalizing relationship to the brotherhood, with the brotherhood. And it is wrong to begin with to turn a popular movement that is so strong and have a strong appeal all the way from Morocco to Indonesia as an enemy in normal circumstances. Not to mention on those circumstances. Yes, they will be useful in if there is a Saudi project or a campaign to counter Iranians' intrusions and influence in the region, the brotherhood will be useful. But even without that, it is wrong to begin with to turn an enemy such as a movement as a brotherhood as an enemy. Thank you, Joyce.
Okay, last question was about Iran's public opinion and its role about Iran.
Yeah, that's a great question, Joyce. I haven't seen any polls that give us with some precise numbers on this, but if we look at the electoral behavior in Iran, we can assume that it's not a very popular policy. So if you look at the elections, again, the presidential elections last time, 2013, President Rouhani won on the platform of improving Iran's foreign policy, more engagement. Again, when you look at the Green Movement back in 2009, some of the slogans that were coming out that neither Gaza nor Lebanon, so all these slogans were coming out. So I don't think it's a very, very popular policy. But what's interesting is the Iranian government is framing its policy in Syria, backing Hamas, actually less so now, and Hezbollah, not in terms of following the footsteps of Prophet Mohammad. In terms of it's purely our national security, that if we don't fight in Damascus now, we have to fight in Tehran tomorrow. That's how they frame it to the larger population, precisely because they don't buy those ideological narratives anymore. So I think it's safe to say that it's not a very, very popular move. And if I can add one more thing.
You can.
Following on what Suzanne was saying, if this nuclear deal is upgraded to a Syria deal, I don't think it's an unrealistic expectation. So back in 2013, Iranian officials, on the one hand, they were saying they're going to back Bashar al-Assad to the end. On the other hand, when Bashar al-Assad got weakened on the eve of the U.S. bombing, when it didn't happen, they signaled that they were willing to compromise on Bashar al-Assad.
So you agree with Barbara that
yes,
they would? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. We have one final question. I want to do something quickly at the end, but Jamal, we have a question in writing, another written question. What's the greatest threat or the greater threat to Saudi Arabia, especially the holy places? Iran or ISIS?
It is chaos.
Chaos.
Chaos in the region that is fed by Iran and ISIS is the greatest threat. Okay. If the situation in Syria and Yemen and Lebanon and God forbid Egypt, Libya turn into more chaos. It is already chaotic enough. This chaos is feed sectarianism, feed hatred, feed ISIS. So our priority should be to put an end to this chaos.
Okay. At closing, I'd like to ask for final remarks from Nadim, who I think has one final comment, and especially because he hasn't played such a huge role in the Q&A. So a final thought from you?
Well, my final thought, thank you for that. I just want to go back to my initial statement that there is a crisis in perception, and that I think is the main thing to be addressed. And the perception is common between the Iranians and the Arabs, if you like, because we see the region more like a chess game.
Yeah.
And in Washington, we think they see it more like a poker game. And where every deal, every hand is separate from the other. You can win some, lose some, you can...
Depends how much you bet.
You can withdraw, you can cut your losses, you can... So
it's a great analogy. I love this analogy.
I think that this is part of the misunderstanding. In Washington, think, okay, so we've won this hand, and let's move to another. But we see it as all interconnected, and we know how the Iranians understand it as well. And there's this disconnect in perception, which will resolve a lot of the problems between the U.S. and its allies.
That's a very fascinating point and a great place to end. So join me in thanking our wonderful panel, Nadim, Suzanne, Jamal, and Mohammad. Very, very interesting. Thank you all for coming.